The winter of 1977 was a particularly unforgiving one in Moscow. It wasn't just the cold, a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to emanate from the concrete apartment blocks themselves, but the spiritual frost of the Zastoy, the era of stagnation. Leonid Brezhnev's face, heavy-jowled and placid, gazed from posters celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. The city was a paradox of official celebration and private weariness. For Major Viktor Rostislavovich Orlov of the KGB's Second Chief Directorate, Counterintelligence, the city was a chessboard, and he was, increasingly, a master of the game. Viktor Orlov was 42 years old, a man forged by the system and dedicated to its preservation. He was not a sadist, nor was he a cynic. He was a true believer, a professional who saw ideology not as a set of ideals, but as a framework for order. His office at the Lubyanka, the massive neo-Baroque headquarters on Dzerzhinsky Square, was sparse, dominated by a heavy oak desk and the ever-present faint smell of strong tobacco and floor wax. He was tall, with the posture of a man who had never been allowed to slouch, and eyes the color of the Moscow sky in November, a flat, observant gray. His colleagues in the Pyatka, the Fifth Directorate, ideological counterintelligence, found him severe. His own subordinates in the Second Directorate respected his meticulousness. He was a man going places. His success afforded him and his wife, Ilara, a life of quiet privilege. They lived not in a communal flat, but in a prestigious nomenklatura block on Kutuzovsky Prospect, a building reserved for high-ranking officials, scientists, and artists favored by the state. Their apartment was spacious by Soviet standards, filled with heavy Czech furniture and a library of sanctioned classics. Viktor's position granted them access to special Beryozka shops where they could procure goods, French cigarettes, Finnish coffee, good leather shoes, unavailable to the general populace. Ilara Orlova, 39, was the perfect complement to the rising major. She was elegant. With dark hair she kept pinned in a severe but fashionable twist, and a quiet, almost reserved intelligence. She worked as a senior editor at the Progress Publishing House, an organ of the state specializing in the translation of Soviet literature and political theory into foreign languages. Her position was trusted. It required fluency in English and French and provided a plausible, state-approved reason for interacting with the occasional foreign academic or cultural delegation. She was seen as polished, reliable, and ideologically sound. She managed their home, hosted the necessary dinners for Viktor's superiors, and seemed to all external observers to be the very model of a Soviet official's wife. Their life was orderly, predictable, and secure. But beneath the surface of this state-sanctioned domesticity, the tectonic plates of ideology and personal truth had begun to shift, grinding silently against each other in the pressurized dark. The tension began not as a crack, but as a subtle change in the atmosphere, the way the air pressure drops before a storm. It was November, and Viktor was consumed by his work. He was finalizing a major operation, codenamed Vector. The objective was to dismantle a suspected network of informants feeding information to a Western embassy. This information was not military secrets, but something the Fifth Directorate considered almost more pernicious. Reports on dissident movements, data on economic shortages, and the circulation of samizdat literature, the typed carbon-copied manuscripts of banned authors like Solzhenitsyn. Viktor's successes were mounting. In the last 4 weeks, his team had rolled up 12 individuals. The arrests were clean, procedural, executed in the pre-dawn quiet. There was the physics professor at Moscow State University, caught with a forbidden analysis of the Helsinki Accords. There was the literary critic who had been corresponding with a researcher in Paris. There was the engineer from a television factory, the disgruntled party member, the poet. 12 names, 12 files closed. At the directorate, Viktor was lauded. Colonel Sitnikov, his immediate superior, and a man whose ideological purity was rivaled only by his ambition, clapped Viktor on the back. "You are cleansing the city, Major," Sitnikov had said, his voice a low rasp. "A clean city is a strong city." At home, the apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect grew quieter. Ilara, normally attentive and inquisitive about his day, seemed preoccupied. She attributed it to a complex translation project at Progress Publishers. a dense volume of Brezhnev's speeches on international relations intended for a French audience. "It's dreadfully dull," she'd said, rubbing her temples. "The syntax is a nightmare." Victor, preoccupied with the final strands of vector, accepted the explanation. Yet he noticed small discrepancies, the kind his training would never let him ignore. Ilara had begun smoking again. He found an empty packet of Gitans, a French brand, in the kitchen waste bin. When he asked, she shrugged. "A gift from a translator at the French delegation. I was stressed." It was plausible. Her work involved such people. Then came the incident at the reception. It was held at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a mandatory event celebrating Soviet-French cultural exchange. The room was overheated and thick with the smell of perfume and catered zakouski. Victor was deep in conversation with a military attaché when he glanced across the room. He saw Ilara speaking with Pierre Dubois, a mid-level attaché from the French Cultural Legation. Dubois was a typical Westerner, overly polished, smiling too easily. Their conversation seemed brief, perhaps 5 minutes. But as Victor watched, he saw Dubois pass Ilara a slim book. She slipped it into her handbag. It was a common enough sight. She was a publisher. But the gesture was quick, almost hidden, and when she turned away, her face was pale and taut. Later, Victor asked what the book was. "Poetry," Ilara replied, a beat too quickly. "Rimbaud. He heard I was interested." Victor nodded, but his internal metrics had registered an anomaly. The Vector case was nearly complete, but one thread remained stubbornly loose. The 12th arrestee, a pale, nervous university lecturer named Borisov, had been resistant during his interrogation. Borisov was not a hardened operative. He was an intellectual who believed in socialism with a human face. He had been passing manuscripts of political commentary to a contact he insisted he had never met. The procedure was anonymous. He would leave his material inside a hollowed-out copy of Pravda at a specific bench in Gorky Park, near the Neskuchny Garden, every third Tuesday. He would return an hour later to find the newspaper gone, replaced by an envelope containing money or, occasionally, requested Western periodicals. This was standard, low-level tradecraft. But Borisov, under the immense psychological pressure of Lefortovo, finally revealed a critical detail. The contact, whom he knew only as Lena, had a secondary emergency signal. If a drop was compromised, a signal would be left inside a specific public library book. Borisov, terrified, gave them the book's title and its call number. It was a volume of Pushkin's poems. Victor dispatched an agent to the library. The book was there. Tucked deep within the binding, unseen by any normal reader, was a microdot. This was an escalation. Microdots were not the tools of disgruntled academics. They were the tools of professional intelligence services. The discovery shifted the entire context of Operation Vector. This was not just a ring of dissidents. It was a managed network. Victor brought the microdot to the technical labs deep within the Lubyanka. The magnified text was a shock. It wasn't a message from Lena, but a set of instructions to her, originating from a Western station. It detailed a new cipher key for upcoming transmissions. The key was based on a specific, obscure edition of Russian folklore. A cold sense of professional curiosity gripped Victor. The 12 arrests had been the network's periphery. Lena was the center, the cutout, the handler. His superiors were ecstatic. They had not just caught informants, they had the chance to catch a genuine foreign agent. Colonel Sitnikov ordered Victor to unmask Lena at all costs. The pressure was immense, but Victor felt the familiar surge of the hunt. That night he worked late studying the decoded instructions. He returned to the apartment after 2 a.m. Ilara was asleep, or pretending to be. He went to his study to review his notes. His eyes scanned his own bookshelf, a floor-to-ceiling collection of Russian literature, and there, on the third shelf, he saw it. Russian Folk Tales, Afanasyev, 1957 edition. The exact edition specified in the microdot. He pulled the book from the shelf. It felt normal. He thumbed through it. Nothing, but his training demanded precision. He examined the spine, a tiny, almost invisible hairline crack in the binding. Using a letter opener, he carefully prized the cardboard backing from the linen cover. Inside, taped to the spine, was a tiny key, the type used for a small personal diary or a cash box. He had never seen it before. The discovery of the key changed everything. Victor's meticulous, orderly world had been breached. His first instinct was provocatia. This was a plant, a complex maneuver by a rival within the directorates, perhaps Sitnikov himself, to frame him, to test his loyalty, or to remove him from his rising position. The paranoia of the system he served now turned inward, pointing directly at his own home. He could not trust his superiors. He could not trust his colleagues, and he could not trust his wife. He did not report the discovery. To do so would be to admit his own home was compromised, a fatal blow to his career. He had to conduct his own investigation, off the books. This was a grave violation of procedure, but his survival depended on it. He locked the tiny key in his office safe at the Lubyanka. He now began to watch Alara, not as a husband, but as a subject. He was the analyst. She was the target. He observed her routines, her trips to the publisher, her visits to the state-run gum department store, her weekly call to her mother in Leningrad. He noted her moods. She was brittle, her silences heavier than before. She complained of headaches, a common ailment in the smog-filled Moscow winter. Simultaneously, he tasked a small, loyal team from his own unit, men who owed their careers to him, with an urgent surveillance operation. He told them they were tracking a new lead from the Vector case. The target, Pierre Dubois, the French cultural attaché. The surveillance had to be deep cover and non-aggressive. They were to log his movements, his meetings, his contacts. He also ordered a technical survey of the Gorky Park drop site. His team, disguised as park maintenance workers, swept the bench and the surrounding area. They found nothing. Lena was clean, professional. She or he had not been back. The reports on Dubois began to filter in. The Frenchman led a predictable life, embassy, cultural events, restaurants open to foreigners. But one entry stood out. Dubois had made a brush pass, a fleeting disguised exchange, with an unknown woman near the Pushkin Museum. The surveillance agent's report was vague. The woman was wearing a heavy coat and a dark fur hat, her face obscured. The exchange was too fast for a clear photograph. Victor's mind was a flurry of calculations. He had to connect Dubois to Alara. He reviewed his wife's schedule for the day of the reported brush pass. She had claimed to be at a mandatory political lecture at the publishing house. Victor did something he had never done. He used his official KGB credentials to make a discreet inquiry at Progress Publishers. He spoke to the party secretary there, a man he knew slightly. He framed his inquiry as a routine background check. The secretary confirmed Alara's attendance. She had signed the roster. It was a dead end. But the contradiction nagged at him. The provocatia theory seemed less likely. The alternative was unthinkable. He was trapped between two impossibilities. He decided to use the key. He waited until Alara was out, supposedly at the Bolshoi Theater with a friend from work. He returned to the apartment. The key was small, but the lock it fit was smaller. He checked her jewelry box. Nothing. He checked her desk. Tucked deep in the back of a drawer, beneath old letters, was a small lacquered wooden box. The key fit. Inside was not a diary. It was a standard-issue Soviet savings passbook. But the transaction log was extraordinary. It showed regular, large deposits of rubles, far exceeding her state salary. The source was listed as private tutoring, a flimsy, implausible cover. Alongside the passbook was a small, tightly rolled piece of paper. He unrolled it. It was a list of names, his names, the 12 people he had arrested. The passbook and the list were the antithesis of a provocatia. No rival would plant evidence this damning, this clumsy, and in his own apartment. This was not a setup. It was a catastrophic failure of his own internal security. The woman he shared his bed with, the woman who ironed his shirts and discussed state ideology over dinner, was Lena. A cold, analytical calm settled over Victor. The emotional component, the betrayal, the personal injury, was a luxury he could not afford. He was a major in the Second Chief Directorate, and he had been living with a foreign agent. His entire career, his 12 recent triumphs, were now cast in a grotesque new light. Had she been guiding him? Had she allowed him to arrest her network, perhaps sacrificing them to protect herself or a larger objective? He sat in his study for an hour, the passbook open on his desk. The silence of the apartment oppressive. He was contaminated. By procedure, he was obligated to call the 7th Directorate, Internal Affairs, immediately and report his findings. Doing so would mean his immediate arrest, his interrogation at Lefortovo, and the end of his life as he knew it. Not reporting it would make him a conspirator, a traitor. He chose a third path, the path of the professional. He would confront the subject. He would conduct the initial interrogation himself. Ilara returned just before midnight. She entered the apartment quietly, humming a tune from Swan Lake. She seemed relaxed, flushed from the cold. She walked into the living room and stopped. Victor was sitting in his armchair, not in his study. The lights were off, save for the single desk lamp that illuminated the passbook and the list. "You were not at the Bolshoi," he stated. It was not a question. Ilara's smile vanished. She looked at the items on the desk, and her face for a brief second showed pure animal panic. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of cold composure that mirrored his own. "The seats were changed," she said, her voice thin. "We went for a walk instead." "Who is Pierre Dubois, Ilara?" She flinched, a bare tremor. "A contact from the publishing house, you know this. He is the cultural attaché. He is also a confirmed officer of the DGSE, the French intelligence service, and you have been meeting him in secret." Ilara said nothing. She unbuttoned her heavy wool coat, her movements slow, deliberate. "The 12 arrests," Victor continued, his voice low, devoid of emotion. "My operation. It was your network. You were the handler." She looked at him, and her eyes were no longer those of his wife, but of a stranger. "They were not spies, Victor. They were patriots. They were writers and scientists who wanted our country to be better, to tell the truth." "You define truth?" He shot back. "You, taking money from a foreign power? You used samizdat as a cover for espionage. You passed state analyses, ideological reports, information you heard at this table. And what information was that?" She interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "That the grain harvest in Kazakhstan failed again? That the Politburo members are old and sick? That we persecute poets? This is not espionage, Victor." "This is just reporting what every person in Moscow already knows in their gut." "You used a book cipher," he said, holding up the list of names. "You took payments. You sacrificed 12 people to protect yourself. My arrests. You let me. You watched me." "I didn't sacrifice them," she hissed, the composure finally cracking. "You did. Your vector was so fast, so brutal. You were rounding them up before I could even send a warning. I tried to signal Borisov. I was too late. You were too efficient." The admission hung in the air. He had not been cleaning the city. He had been cleaning up her operation, a janitor sweeping up the debris of her espionage. The success that was meant to secure his promotion was, in fact, the proof of his ultimate failure. "Who else?" he demanded. "Who is above Dubois? What is the primary objective?" Ilara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You are interrogating me in our living room. Will you take me to the Lubyanka yourself, Major? Will you write the report on your own wife?" He stood up, his face a mask of granite. "The system is everything, Ilara. It is order. You chose chaos. You chose betrayal. I must follow procedure." "Then follow it," she said, pulling her coat back around her. "But know this, Victor. You are not arresting a traitor. You are arresting the only person in your life who is telling the truth." He walked to the telephone. He paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. He knew the number for the duty officer at the 7th Directorate by heart. He looked at Ilara, at the Czech furniture, at the life he had built. It was all a stage, a backdrop for her real work. He lifted the receiver and began to dial. The call was brief and procedural. Major Orlov, VR, reporting a critical breach of state security at his own residence. He identified the subject as Orlova, EP, his spouse. He requested an immediate internal security detail from the 7th Directorate. He did not provide details over the line. He did not need to. The fact of the call itself was enough. He hung up the phone. The apartment was utterly silent. Ilara had not moved. She stood by the door, still in her coat, as if she were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The two off them waited in the static-filled silence, two antagonists in a play that had reached its inevitable grim conclusion. There was nothing left to say. The personal had been fully consumed by the professional. In less than 20 minutes, a black Gaz-24 Volga, unmarked, pulled onto the rain-slicked pavement of Kutuzovsky Prospect. Two men, identically dressed in dark civilian-cut suits, emerged. They were not from Victor's directorate. They were cleaners, men from internal affairs whose faces showed no emotion, no curiosity. They were instruments of the system. They did not knock loudly. The rap on the door was firm, quiet, and final. Victor opened it. The men looked at him, then passed him at Alara. Their eyes registered his rank, but their expressions did not change. "Major Orlov," the senior man said, "we are here for the subject." Victor stepped aside. Alara walked forward, her face pale but resolute. She did not look at Victor. She did not look at the apartment. She simply handed one of the men her handbag, as if she were checking it at a cloakroom. One of the men produced a document. "Ilara Petrovna Orlova," he read in a monotone, "by order of the Presidium, you are detained under Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code, treason against the motherland." They did not put her in restraints. It was not necessary. The authority they carried was absolute. She was flanked by the two men and led to the elevator. Victor watched from the doorway of his apartment. Just before the elevator doors closed, Alara turned her head and looked directly at him. Her gaze was not one of fear or of hate or of love. It was one of pity. The elevator doors closed. Victor was alone. His apartment was no longer his home. It was a compromised location. He knew the next steps. He sat in his study and waited. Within the hour, a second team arrived. This team was from the technical branch. They were polite but cold. They began a full forensic sweep of the apartment. They were not looking for Alara's tools. They were looking for his. They were searching for evidence of his complicity. They x-rayed the walls. They dismantled his radio. They opened every book, checked every piece of clothing. They found the hollowed-out Pushkin volume he had missed. They found a miniature Minox camera hidden inside a transistor radio. They found a one-time pad concealed in the lining of a winter boot. His wife's life, the real one, was being cataloged item by item. At 4 a.m., Colonel Sitnikov arrived. His face was a mask of profound, almost theatrical disappointment. "Victor Rostislavovich," Sitnikov said, his voice heavy, "this is a dark day, a very dark day. I reported it as soon as the suspicion was confirmed," Victor said, his voice level. "Confirmed?" Sitnikov raised an eyebrow. "Or as soon as you could no longer conceal it. 12 arrests, Major." 12. And the handler was sleeping in your bed. How does that look, do you think? It looks like you were cleaning house for her. It looks like you were her partner. That is a lie, Victor said. It is a possibility, Sitnikov corrected him, and we must investigate every possibility. You are compromised. Your security clearance is revoked. You will be escorted to Lefortovo, not as an officer, as a subject of inquiry. 2 guards, this time in uniform, entered the room. They did not touch Victor. They simply stood, waiting. His fall was as procedural as his wife's arrest. He had been a major, a hunter. Now he was a file, a problem to be solved. As they led him out of the building, he saw the first gray light of dawn breaking over the cold, sleeping city he had tried to protect. There are 2 prisons in the mind of a KGB officer: the Lubyanka, which was a place of work, and Lefortovo, which was a place of endings. Victor Orlov was taken to Lefortovo. He was processed not as a colleague, but as a potential traitor. His belt, shoelaces, and rank insignia were removed. He was placed in an isolation cell, cell 117. It was small, damp, and the light burned 24 hours a day. His interrogation began 48 hours later. The method was not physical, it was psychological. A meticulous deconstruction of his life, his career, and his identity. The interrogator was not a stranger. It was Colonel Sitnikov. Let us review the timeline, Victor Rostislavovich. Sitnikov began, seated across a simple metal table. The room was warm, deliberately overheated. You began Operation Vector on October 3rd. Your wife, according to her preliminary testimony, made contact with the French attaché Dubois on October 5th. A coincidence? I was not aware of her contacts, Victor stated. Were you not? Or did her contact on the 5th initiate your operation? Did she feed you the names of the 12, perhaps to remove dissenters from her own network, or to build your reputation as a spy catcher to provide you with better cover? That is absurd. The intelligence came from informants. Informants who are now gone. How convenient. Sitnikov smiled, a thin reptilian gesture. Your wife is very compelling. She confessed everything. She has been cooperating fully. This was the true blow. Ilara was talking. She claims she did it for ideological reasons. Sitnikov continued, casually lighting a papyrosa. She believed the system was corrupt. She said she passed analytical documents on internal economic morale. And where did she get these analyses, Victor? She said you discussed your work at home. You complained about the grain shortages. You mentioned the reports from the 5th Directorate on dissident moods. You, Major, were her primary source. Victor's blood ran cold. It was true. He had vented. He had complained about the inefficiencies of other directorates, the banal realities of the state he served. He had seen it as harmless venting to his wife. She had seen it as raw intelligence. The interrogations blurred into one long, sleepless session. Victor's reality was inverted. His successes were failures. His efficiency was negligence. His trust in his wife was complicity. Ilara's fate was decided quickly and without a public trial. As the wife of a high-ranking KGB officer, her treason was a profound institutional embarrassment. It could not be allowed to become public. Her confession, whether coerced or genuine, was enough. She was declared mentally unwell, a victim of sluggish schizophrenia, a common diagnosis used by the state to disappear ideological opponents into the Sekushka system. She was transferred from Lefortovo to a specialized psychiatric hospital in Kazan. Her file was sealed, classified at the highest level. Victor's trial was a closed military tribunal, held in a windowless room in the sub-basement of the Lubyanka. The verdict was predetermined. Sitnikov presented the case. Victor Orlov was not a traitor. That would have implied the French had compromised the Second Directorate itself. Instead, he was found guilty of a charge almost worse for an officer: criminal negligence and ideological contamination resulting in a breach of state security. He was stripped of his rank. He was stripped of his party membership. He was stripped of his pension and his apartment. He was, in effect, erased from the institution he had served his entire adult life. He was not sentenced to the Gulag. That, Sitnikov explained, would be admitting a security failure. Instead, he was released. He was made a non-person, which, in the Soviet Union, was a different kind of prison. To be expelled from the nomenklatura was to fall from a great height. Victor Orlov, once a major with a chauffeured car, was now a civilian with no status and a volchi billet, a wolf's ticket, an internal passport stamp that marked him as politically unreliable. It made finding meaningful work impossible. He lost the apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect. His possessions were seized as assets acquired through compromised state employment. He was eventually forced to take a room in a crowded kommunalka, communal apartment, on the industrial outskirts of the city, sharing a kitchen and a bathroom with 5 other families. His new neighbors, sensing his past, avoided him. He found work as a storage, a night watchman, at a vast, freezing storage depot for industrial tires. His job was to sit in a small wooden hut and ensure no one stole the tires. It was a parody of his former life. He had gone from guarding the ideological purity of the Soviet state to guarding rubber. The psychological isolation was absolute. Former colleagues from the Directorate, men with whom he had shared vodka and celebrated state holidays, would cross the street if they saw him. To be seen acknowledging Victor Orlov was to invite suspicion upon oneself. He was a ghost in his own city. He tried once to find Ilara. He took a train to Kazan and attempted to visit the specialized hospital. He was met at the gate by a stern-faced man in a white coat who informed him that subject Orlova was in a non-responsive state and could not receive visitors. The file was sealed. He was turned away. The 12 spies he had arrested met their own bleak fates. With Ilara's confession confirming them as part of a foreign-managed network, their cases were finalized. They were not given the mercy of an ideological re-education. They were sentenced under Article 64 and Article 70, anti-Soviet agitation, and sent to the hard labor camps in the Perm region. Borisov, the lecturer, was sent to Perm 36. Victor learned, through a whispered rumor, that the physics professor had perished during his first winter in the camp, his health failing. As for the other players, Pierre Dubois, the French attaché, had been quietly declared persona non grata and expelled from the USSR weeks after Ilara's arrest, a standard diplomatic tit-for-tat. Colonel Sitnikov, having successfully purged a compromised officer and unmasked a spy ring, was promoted to general. His career, built on the ruins of Victor's, flourished. Viktor Orlov, the man who had been the hunter, was now the ultimate prey. Forgotten, isolated, and left to contemplate the wreckage of a life built on the absolute certainties of a system that had devoured him. The years passed like a long gray smear. The 1970s bled into the 1980s. Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko. The stagnation Victor had once defended began to crack under its own weight. Then came Gorbachev, and with him, the tremors of perestroika and glasnost. It was 1989. Victor was an old man, though he was only in his mid-50s. The work at the tire depot, the poor food, and the profound isolation had weathered him. He was thin, gray, and quiet. He still lived in the Kommunalka, but the atmosphere in Moscow had changed. The air was electric with debate. Banned books, the same samizdat he had once hunted, were now being published in literary journals. One day, while queuing for bread at a newly opened cooperative kiosk, he saw a familiar figure. It was General Sitnikov, now retired. He was well-dressed, his cheeks ruddy, carrying a mesh bag filled with sausages and cheese from a closed distributor. Their eyes met. Victor recognized the flicker of recognition in Sitnikov's gaze, followed immediately by a cold, deliberate dismissal. The general turned his back on Victor and walked away. The system, even in its reform, still protected its own. The new openness, however, gave Victor a sliver of hope. The concept of rehabilitation was being discussed. He began a new, pathetic quest to find Ilara. He wrote letters. He petitioned the new Congress of People's Deputies. He wrote to the editorial board of Ogonyok, a magazine famous for exposing the state's past. Most of his letters vanished into the bureaucratic void, but one day, a plain white envelope arrived. It was from the main military prosecutor's office. It was not a rehabilitation. It was a clarification. In the matter of Orlova EP, the letter read, "Her file remains sealed by state decree. However, we can confirm that the subject expired in 1981 at Special Hospital No. 5, Kazan. Cause of expiration is listed as cardiac failure. She had been gone for 8 years. He had been writing letters to a woman who no longer existed. The news did not bring grief, only a dull, hollow ache. A few months later, he read an article about the political prisoners being released from the Perm labor camps. He saw a name he recognized: Borisov, the lecturer. Victor found him living in a single room, his health destroyed by the labor and the cold. Borisov, expecting a threat, was shocked to see his arresting officer at his door. "Why are you here?" Borisov whispered, his voice damaged. I wanted to know," Victor said, "about Lena, Ilara, my wife." Borisov looked at him with empty eyes. "We never knew her. She was just a contact, a ghost. We were fools, caught between your machine and her games. It didn't matter who was right. We were just paper, and you were the fire." Victor left. He had his answer. In the grand ledger of the Cold War, he and the 12 spies and his own wife were all just acceptable losses, collateral damage in a war fought with files and whispers. Viktor Orlov lived to see the end of it all. He stood in the Moscow snow in August of 1991 and watched as the crowd surrounded the Lubyanka, chanting for its dissolution. He watched as they pulled down the statue of Iron Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the secret police, the icon who had stared from his office wall for 20 years. He felt nothing. No triumph, no sadness. Just the weary detachment of a historian watching a monument fall. He returned to his small room. The new Russia was loud, chaotic, and obsessed with money, a new system he understood even less than the old one. He sat by his window, watching the city change, and reflected on the great invisible mechanism to which he had given his life. He had arrested 12 people in a month. He had been a good officer. He had followed procedure, even when it led to his own living room. He had sacrificed his wife to the state, and the state in return had discarded him. Was Ilara a traitor? In the eyes of the law he served, yes, unequivocally. But in the new world being born, she would be called a hero, a dissident. Victor saw the ambiguity. He saw that she had used his own mundane complaints, his dinner table griping, as a weapon against the very system that gave them their privileged life. She had been the true professional. He had just been the tool. His mind went back to that last look she gave him before the elevator doors closed. It was pity. She had pitied him. She had seen in that final moment that he was the one who was truly imprisoned, trapped by his belief in a system that demanded everything and gave nothing. The Cold War, he concluded, was not won by bombs or armies. It was a war of proximity, fought in kitchens and offices. It was a conflict of belief, where loyalty to an idea was tested against loyalty to a person. Viktor Orlov had made his choice. He had chosen the idea, and the idea in the end had evaporated, leaving him with nothing but the ghosts of the 12 he had arrested, and the memory of the one he had exposed. He had been the perfect officer, and in his perfection, he had destroyed everything, including himself. The system had won, even as it died.